In the middle of the African savanna, a man stood face to face with a lioness. Her stare was sharp enough to cut, her steps silent and deadly. Behind him, a wounded cub whimpered, barely hanging on. The lioness moved closer, and then did something no human could have ever expected. But what happened next will shock even those who think they've seen it all. First, let's go back to the beginning. The cub's body was all brittle bones and fever heat, so small, so violently alive in its suffering. Brian could feel its shallow breath fluttering against his chest, rapid and fragile, like a bird caught in a storm. Its golden fur was matted with blood and dirt, the once proud rosettes of a wild prince now dulled and darkened. Flies buzzed around its wound, attracted to the open gash on its hind leg. Brian gritted his teeth and pressed the edge of his sleeve to the cut, not to fix it, just to slow the bleeding. He'd seen worse injuries before, but never like this. Never to something so young, so doomed. The hyenas hadn't gone far. They circled at a distance, yellow eyes flashing like embers in the grass, their laughter warped and guttural. One of them, the largest, paced with maddening patience, its thick jaws twitching every time Brian moved. They weren't retreating. They were waiting for weakness, for the right angle, for the flare's fear to fade from their memory. Predators didn't care about rules or bravery. They cared about meat, and Brian had just stolen theirs. He scanned the field, measuring every exit. The dried riverbed offered little in terms of escape, just flat stone and brittle thorn trees that offered no cover and even less mercy. The sun had already begun its descent, and with night would come cold and more hunger, and worse things than hyenas. He crouched lower, whispering to the cub again, not out of reason, but ritual. "You're not dying today, all right? You're not a lesson in some ranger's training manual. Not while I'm breathing." His voice cracked halfway through. He pressed his forehead to the cub's for a second, the way he used to when Ellie was sick, when he still believed that love could will someone to survive. He pulled his radio from his belt, crackling to life with static. No signal. Too deep in the valley. Too far from the main outpost. He was alone. But it wasn't fear that swelled in his chest. It was resolve. That sharp, bitter clarity that comes when you realize no one else is coming. When the world narrows into one line. Protect what you can, while you can. He stood, branch in hand, body coiled. Behind him, unseen, the yellow eyes narrowed. Not the hyenas. Something larger, something watching. The silence that followed her roar was a living thing, thick, breathless, coiled like a spring between life and death. Brian could feel his pulse hammering at the base of his neck, a thudding drumbeat to the moment's unblinking stillness. The mother lion stood like a statue chiseled from dusk itself, muscles taut beneath her golden hide, her chest heaving with slow, deliberate breaths. The moonlight carved silver into her coat, but it did nothing to soften her. This was no Disney fantasy. She was the raw edge of nature, the embodiment of both mercy and ruin. And her cub had been in the hands of a man. Brian kept his arms wide, empty palms trembling just slightly, but his eyes didn't flinch. He met her gaze, not with challenge, but with something older, something primal, understanding. She was not just a mother. She was a grieving one. That cub had screamed in pain long enough for the entire plain to hear. She had heard, and she had come. She padded closer, each step silent as falling ash. When she passed within feet of him, the air itself felt denser, as though the planet leaned inward to watch. Brian felt her heat, her scent, sun-baked grass, blood, the sharp tang of fur rubbed raw against thorns. He could see the fly-bitten scar above her right eye, the way her lip curled slightly over a chipped fang. This was not her first battle. She had lived long enough to wear war like a second pelt. She stopped at the cub, lowered her head, sniffed. Then, with impossible gentleness, she nuzzled its ear. The cub stirred, weakly, blinking up at her with dazed eyes. She licked its face. Once, twice, slow, deliberate. Her tongue swept across the wounds Brian had cleaned, erasing the scent of him, reclaiming what was hers. And then she did it. The unthinkable. She turned to Brian. Their eyes locked again, and for one breathless moment, the world tipped. Her ears flattened, not back in aggression, but downward. Her head dipped lower. Not submission, not surrender. It was acknowledgement. A nod given across species, across fear, across the untamed river that separated man from beast. She nudged the cub toward him, and then, impossibly, she lay down. Not in defeat, but in trust. And between them, man, cub, lioness, an ancient covenant formed. Not of words, not of logic, but of something sacred, something earned. The days that followed unfolded with the surreal weight of myth, as if time had slipped into a space where rules no longer applied. Brian moved through them not like a visitor to the wild, but as a limb grafted to it, bleeding and breathing in rhythm with the land. Every morning he woke in the crook of the ravine beside the cub, now named Jax, who stirred weakly, slowly rebuilding the strength torn from him by teeth and terror. The wound on his leg was healing, though unevenly. Brian reapplied wrappings with hands that had long since stopped shaking, guided not by training manuals, but by instinct and something deeper: devotion. Sierra did not speak. She didn't have to. Her eyes did. Each time she dropped meat at the edge of the clearing, fresh killed antelope still steaming in the dawn air, she stared at Brian with a gaze as ancient as fire. Not gratitude, not deference, recognition. He had been tried, and he had not turned away. She allowed no approach. When Brian wandered too far, she would rise silently from the tall grass, her presence a wall. But she never showed fangs. She never growled. She only watched, ensuring his orbit never pulled too wide from the cub they now both claimed. On the fourth day, Brian's radio came alive with sharp static. "Walker, come in. You're out of range and off protocol. This isn't a rescue op anymore. Return to base." He stared at the device for a long time before pressing the button. "If I leave him now, he dies. If I leave her, she kills someone else looking for him. I'm staying." He tossed the radio aside. That night, the mechanical whine of a drone slit through the windless dark. Brian knew the sound too well. Poachers. They came not long after, 2 men, boots crunching dry gravel, night vision scopes glowing green. Their rifles were already up. Brian stepped into the open, between them and the cub, between them and Sierra. "Don't," he said simply. One of the men laughed. The other chambered around. And then the roar came. It was not a sound. It was a rupture, a sonic quake that turned marrow to vapor and split the moment wide open. The poachers stumbled back, terror naked on their faces. The lioness stepped from the shadows, eyes locked on the man who had aimed at her child. Brian didn't move, didn't blink. He stood in the line of fire, not between her and the men, but beside her. By morning, the poachers were gone. One rifle was found near the edge of the ravine, broken in two like a snapped bone. No one spoke of what had happened, but in every unspoken word, the truth rang clear. Sierra had chosen. The first light of dawn crept across the savannah like a secret whispered in gold. The air was still, heavy with that sacred kind of quiet that belongs only to endings. Brian sat on a flat stone near the ravine, elbows resting on his knees, watching Jax limp through the tall grass in figure eights, testing his strength. Each step still carried a hint of pain, but there was power returning to his limbs, a young predator's fluid grace rebuilding itself in real time. Sierra lay a short distance away, regal and unmoving, her amber eyes trained not on her cub, but on Brian. Something in the way she held herself, the stiffness in her shoulders, told him what he hadn't wanted to accept. This was it. Jax wandered back, nuzzled Brian's thigh, and gave a soft, wheezing huff. A sound like a sigh, like understanding. Brian rubbed behind his ear gently, the way Ellie used to pet their old Labrador back home. "You did good, little man," he said. "You fought like hell." Then Sierra stood, tall, silent, absolute. Her silhouette shimmered in the low sun, and Brian knew without needing a word, it was time. He gave Jax one final pat, and the cub turned. No hesitation, no drama. Just nature unfolding as it always had, patient, cyclical, unburdened by sentiment. The cub bounded forward, a little unevenly, and Sierra began to walk away. Brian stood, arms crossed tight across his chest, trying to swallow the stone in his throat. He'd known this would hurt. He just hadn't expected it to feel so final. And then Sierra did the unthinkable. She stopped. She turned. She approached. Brian didn't dare move. Every muscle in him locked, not from fear, but reverence. He watched her pad toward him with deliberate steps, eyes steady, tail low. The world held its breath. Then she pressed her forehead gently, deliberately, against his chest. The contact was light, fleeting, but it cracked him open like glass under pressure. A lion's gesture. A vow. She lingered just a moment, exhaled through her nose, then turned without a glance back and melted into the wild. And Brian, this battle-scarred medic, this grieving father, this accidental guardian, collapsed to his knees, breath hitching in great heaving sobs. But they weren't tears of grief. They were release, gratitude, grace. Later, in his quiet Wyoming cabin, when he carved the lion out of cedar and etched the words with his own hands, he wasn't just remembering. He was testifying. The wild remembers the good, and sometimes it gives you back more than you ever thought you'd lost.